Hello. In this video, I'm going to run through the administration area of the system and go through the main forms you need to consider when setting up the system or administering the system. So I'm going to start by logging in, and to get to the administrative area, you need to log in using your root username and password. And this will give you the areas of the system that are used in setting up the system, general administration, doing things like adding users, adding workflows, turning on and off option flags, setting tax code, nominal codes, and things like that. And I'm just going to work through those. I'll start with the most important forms and then just work down the list. It's worth noting that a few of these forms are covered in separate videos. These are as follows: creating, deleting user IDs and passwords, which is setting up users; default document text, which is setting up documentation; enabling, disabling modules for users, which is in the same video as the creation of user IDs. And also we'll have separate videos for workflow admin. And we'll probably do one for the material code wizard, although we do have supporting documentation for that, which can be found on the workflow manual. So I'm going to start by opening up the setting of central company information screen. And this screen has all the internal system setup you really need for just getting the system set up from the start. So firstly, company name. So this is your own company's information, and this data will be outputted onto the documentation. One thing to consider here: currency label. So if you're an Australian customer, you'll need to change this to dollar. And also worth noting that the company name is fixed in the system. So if you do have a company name change, you'll need to contact Redthorn to discuss that with us, because it's related to licensing. Then we're into default settings. Now on the left hand side we have what we call the starting numbers. The starting numbers really are for system setup if you have an outgoing system and you have outgoing numbering systems in place. So you may be up to purchase order 20,010 now, and you may choose to splice into a later purchase order number in our system, so you can see when you changed systems. So you set these at the beginning of a system setup, and then once you're running transactional data, you can't change these numbers. On the right here is default values. These are some of the defaults you set within the system that work when you're entering data in the system. So default material markup. If I add a percentage in here, every time I put a material into the material database and put the value in, the internal system markup will default to that percentage, and that's for estimating and sales, etc. You can overwrite it, but you can set a default. Log days is how long the system will hold the logs without clearing them, so 14 is a default, leave it at that. General charge out rate is a machine charge out rate that's applied globally across the system. So whilst you can set internal and machine level charge out rates, you can set a general one to be picked up for job costings and estimates where you don't have specific ones set up. Job delivery days, that will set the required date when you're creating a new job in the system. So it will set it 7 days from today. So if I change that 14 days, it's just the default required date that will go on the new setup of a job, or lead time. Number of deliveries is how many deliveries will be allowed to collate on a delivery note. And in-out refresh is just the wait time on refreshing our employee in-out display. Default movement time you can put in for movements between between operations on jobs. So you can set, there's always a default movement time, but you can also set movement times at operational level or associated with machine centers. So there's 3 different ways of doing movement time. Here, a global movement time, which goes between every single operation, between linked to a machine center, so you get a movement time after every before that machine center is used, or you can set them into the routing on a per movement time or per operation basis. Next, print logos will tell me whether I'm going to use the logos that I've loaded into the system in document image, and we have a separate video that covers this under default document text. So that just tags those on and off, so they're on at the minute. And a closed touchscreen bracket supervisor. Having that turned on will give the supervisor, when they're on the touchscreen, an option to actually close the touchscreen. And this should be left off really, and you only turn it on if you're planning on an upgrade to the system, or a CD release or software upgrade release, where you want to allow your supervisors to shut down the touchscreens temporarily. So now I'm going to go to the option flags of the system. And in this screen and the second screen is where you can set all the different flags onto the system to control how the system operates. And these work in lots of different ways, and I'll give a couple of examples so you can get an idea for what they do. So print company address and print customer name, for example, tagging those on and off will control whether they appear on your printed documentation. Let's choose another one. Default deliver into stock, so that will change the screen to show the drop down delivery on that screen as it delivers into stock or delivers direct to the customer. And on the second one, you can see you've got other things like auto allocate available stock. So this is a back flushing element to the system. So if you've set up your material to allocate automatically, if it's available, it'll book in. If you haven't got that checked, you have to manually allocate stock. But in order to go through these, the best thing to do is to look in the manual. So I'll just show you very quickly where you can find that information. So if I go to print manual, and this is our workflow manual, and I happen to know that it is page 92 on the manual, 96 on the manual, 99 on the manual, 96 is the start of the admin area, 99 is for the individual option flags. So you can see for each option flag we have text of what all the flags are. So I'd recommend you read that element of the manual just to understand all the option flags. Next up, job card install. Putting something in here, for example, please check quality documentation. That means every time you print a job card, on the job card instructions, that text will come out for every single card you produce. So if you have a short-term message you want to put out to all staff running with job cards, you would use this area to put that in. Some people use it to have some permanent notes for customers. So there's a few different ways people use this, but it's instructions that will go on every single card in the system. The export area of the system is where you set up your export to Sage. This will be covered in the Sage export video, but the main areas of this is what you're exporting to. So we've got a number of options, where the files are going to be dropped to, and they're the transaction and header files. The minimum price of a invoice you're going to export, whether it references the supplier debt number. So if you're using different supplier customers and suppliers numbers or identifiers in the Redthorn system to your Sage system, you can, in the supplier and customer information, reference the Sage system. So that'll tell you whether it uses the reference that's given or the Sage supplied reference. So I'll just open that very quickly in a system I have logged on and show you the information on that. So if I go to customer information, bring up any customer, you can see in financial I'll have customer debtor number. So you can see I've got these different here. So if the box isn't checked, it'll choose that one. If the box is checked, it'll choose that one. So I'll just come back to the system. So that's that checkbox. Account currency and conversion rates tells you whether it's going to pull it through. And then this area just tells you whether you want to, how you want to pull the data through and whether you do or not. So this system's pulling both purchase invoices and sales invoices, and it's doing it by line rather than total. It's got default nominals and how it's collated, and finally whether it runs the report, whether it runs the export when it's completed. And you can also export your payroll data. Next is internal system information. So this is Redthorn usage only, so there's no need to try and make any changes to that. Next is licensing for your resource scheduling if you have it. This will tell you how many licenses you've got, and in order to activate it on an individual machine, you need to put the host or the computer name for the machine on that. Here, you might want to contact the support help desk for help on this if you're struggling to make it work. The resource scheduling package is a machine-specific licensed package, unlike the rest of the system. Document image is where you load your images that output to the default documents. That's covered in the default document text video. And finally, the customer improvement program control settings. This is again is internal Redthorn usage, so there's no need to make any changes to that. So now I'm going to go through the other areas of the system and show you some of the other setup elements in administration. So if I come out of here, I'm going to work these through. I'm going to try and work these through kind of in order of importance. So I'm going to start with setting up of tax codes. This is where you set the different tax codes within the system, and you can see I've got standard rate tax, non-VAT sales, VAT exempt sales, etc., etc. So you use these codes, in and around the system when you're transacting on the system, and you can see the accounts reference codes you add there. Likewise, nominal codes work very much the same way. You can add your nominal codes into the system, and you can also alias for the Sage export the equivalent nominal code. So you can use separate nominal codes in the Redthorn system to your Sage system. Amend customized titles. In this screen, you can actually change the titles you see on some of the working screens. So if you see on IRN reference custom 1 here, if I switch to the actual system itself, if I look into part setup, you can see here I have some custom fields and I have renamed that field. So if I go back here, I can say reference number 2, save. And if I refresh this, bring it apart again, you can see I've refreshed the reference number on the screen. So this is just there's some field titles in the system where you can amend the title as the user would see it on the screen to make it more sense for your users when they're using the system. So next up, standard costs. Calculate save standard costs for sub-assemblies. Running this will update your material database price for all sub-assemblies with their calculated costs, calculate standard costs. So you can manually set up sub-assembly costs, or you can use this form to calculate their standard costs based on their own calculations for build. This isn't something we recommend customers to do. Generally, it's something they do within the system. So now I can look at departments, and departments allows you to set departments for the company and allocate sales percentages against those departments. So you can target different areas of the company to achieve certain targets. So I have planning, shop floor, purchasing, office and sales, and I've set them up, and I can add a new one by doing create department, delete department. But to fully understand it, you need to actually see it in action. So if I go to part product maintenance in the system logged in as a normal user, bring up a assembly. In depart pricing, you can see I've allocated 25% to planning, 25% of this to shop floor, and 50% to sales. I can set targets for each of the areas, so I can see I've done a financial target for each of my departments. And then lastly, I can, once I've transacted in the system, I can measure the output, and that can be seen in invoice setup output to date. And here I can see if each department, I can see how they're doing against their set targets. So targets, the actual sales that's been allocated to them, and what's required, which may be, this first one, they're ahead of target. Here, purchasing haven't hit any of their target yet. And so that's really how departments work. It's an ability to measure output. So now I'm going to look at the customer improvement program. And this is just a piece of internal system functionality that allows us to allows the system to feedback errors to Redthorn. So if you say yes, you're willing to participate, the system will periodically email reports back to Redthorn showing errors and issues within the system. So it's not a it's not a spyware. It's not passing any data. It's just an error logging and reporting system, much like Microsoft would use. Optimize database performance. There are two elements to this: estimate and compute. So you'd use this system to optimize all your indexing and table objects within the database. This could be run annually. It doesn't have to be run. It's just something that can improve the performance of the system. Oracle is extremely powerful as it stands, so many customers will never know this is here or run it, but you can run it to optimize the database and improve performance of the database. Estimate is a slightly lighter version, compute a fuller version. Estimate will run quicker than the compute element. Next, screen level help creation. And this just allows you to change your help text on all the individual forms on the system. So if I go to amend delivery notes, you can see there's some corresponding help text that's in the system. And if I go to amend delivery notes within the system logged in, if I click the help, you can see that's that text there. So in the admin area, you can actually change this text if you like and edit it to suit how you follow a process, how you do something, and it will be reflected in the system. Next up, system usage audit. This allows you to see how often certain areas of the system are being used. And this can be very beneficial for doing an analysis of how well your system is being used. So for example, unsurprisingly, central company information has been used a lot recently in the system because I've been training or creating the training videos on it. So this can be used to see where your system's in use and, just as importantly, where your system's not in use, so you can look at areas that aren't being used and then make a management decision to start using them. The training schedule, you can record training sessions that you've given to staff in the system, so when we come in and train on a one-to-one, we'll actually put that we've trained, who we've trained, the areas covered, and some notes. So we have a record, and the customer has a record as who's been trained on what. And you can also print those and show the training records for a company. And lastly, user activity log. If I go in here, I can look at someone's user history. So this is a very useful thing to see how well or how often people are using the system or who's logged in where and where. So if I take a month in time and I do it for my own username, for all items, I can get a view on how much the username Tom has used the system in the last month. So here's all my usage of the system in the last month. So it's a good record of how well a user is using the system or when they've been using the system. So that concludes the training video for administration. Just to note, there's some areas I haven't covered. These areas all have a video themselves, and links to those videos will be in the video notes below the video.